mine. There it is. I guess I should ask. Board members, is that a good way of approaching this? I think we have to read these things out loud, otherwise it's unfair to those attending. Okay, so this is a draft of the planning board report to the village board on Butterfield project, written by me, no revisions yet. Revisions we'll talk about in a few minutes. Okay, it's in three parts. I'll mention there's an introduction, general recommendations, and zoning recommendations. Introduction. Over the past several months, the Planning Board exercised leadership in attempting to steer the Butterfield project in a direction that would benefit the village of Cold Spring. Actually, in multiple directions, since Planning Board members found themselves disagreeing on many aspects of the proposal. This no doubt caused some frustration for the applicant, Mr. Paul Valero, his allies, and perhaps for some members of the community. We think the magnitude of Mr. Galero's proposed development made it inevitable that differences in opinion would emerge in the community, so that the Planning Board's internal disagreements merely reflected those of the community at large. The Planning Board is proud of the efforts we have made to date in considering the Butterfield proposal, especially in slowing down the accelerated timetable pushed by Mr. Galero. His timetable was surprisingly unrealistic coming from a professional developer who has worked with the village and its boards in the recent past. On the other hand, his timetable might have reflected his perceived ability to bulldoze the community into acceptance by angling our need for a new post office location. If not fulfilling Mr. Galero's expectations of lightning-fast approval caused him upset, frankly, he deserved it. The March 2012 site walk gave members of the elected and appointed boards a chance to consider the reality of the proposal. The general feeling that emerged from the site walk was that a pause was required to solicit the views of the community rather than marching forward like lemmings off the cliff with a proposal that was not sufficiently vetted and the village would be living with for decades to come. As a result of the sidewalk, a so-called charrette or public meeting was held to give interested members of the community an opportunity to think out loud on the implications of Mr. Galero's proposal and offer an alternative vision for the site. This additional step in the approval process clearly irked Mr. Galero, since it was upsetting his timetable and threatened his self-proclaimed property rights to build whatever he wants, as if there was no such thing as public input and a zoning code. After the charrette meeting, the Planning Board made a decision to look at the Butterfield site with a non-traditional approach. Mr. Galero wanted the village board to create plan unit development PUD district for the Butterfield site to accommodate his plans, since the existing zoning for the site would not. Rather than assume that Mr. Galero's PUD would be enacted and his plans merely needed shaping, the Planning Board looked at the Butterfield site in its current state and used informal polling among board members to, quote, build up, unquote, the site into something that would serve as a starting point for discussion with Mr. Galero. The basis for this voting was not individual whim, as has been suggested in some quarters. Each Planning Board member based his vote on the Cold Spring Comprehensive Plan, recorded public input of the charrette, and our experience working with applicant site plans. Much of the polling resulted in 3-2 votes that mostly mirrored Mr. Galero's proposal to keep the Leahy Medical Arts Pavilion, construct a municipal building, senior affordable housing, and senior market rate condominiums. The latter component did not find favor with the majority, resulting in an impasse with the applicant. To resolve the impasse, the village attorney proposed a meeting with 2 members of the Planning Board, the applicant, and attorneys for both sides to discover an acceptable compromise. Mr. Galero agreed to this meeting, but decided to withdraw his application a day later. The meeting did not occur. General recommendations. This is part 2. The recommendations of the Planning Board are similar to what was stated 3 months ago in a report to the Village Board, though the recent polling of board members on aspects of Mr. Galero's proposal is also reflected in these points. I'll go through each point. There are 9 of them. 1. The Leahy Pavilion, Cold Springs Medical Arts Building should remain as is and be unaffected by the eventual development of the site. Some members of the Planning Board hope facilities within could be expanded to assist senior citizens' needs, which would be a positive for the community. 2. The municipal building, which will contain offices for several levels of local government and a community senior center, should be constructed. Housing, post office in this building is desirable if the U.S. Postal Service still wishes to maintain a presence in Cold Spring. Although a majority of the planning board agrees with the proposed location below the Leahy Pavilion, the minority is concerned with the feasibility of having sufficient parking to satisfy all tenants. An engineer's report is critical to make a determination. The minority favored placing the structure to the south on Route 9D, where there is more space to accommodate the parking needs for all tenants. 3. The majority of the board agreed with the applicant that the derelict Butterfield Hospital should be demolished to make way for whatever comes. The minority wanted some or all of the building to be renovated and repurposed, citing the history of the building and its origin as a gift from Mrs. Butterfield to the village. 4. The majority of the board agreed with the applicant that the site should include affordable housing for seniors for reasons including the current and future senior demography of the area, as well as empathy for those who may not be able to afford the proposed market rate senior housing. The minority felt this type of housing was not sufficiently tax positive for the village and that tenants would be mostly not local, giving our village the role of warehousing other community seniors. 5. The majority of the board did not support market rate senior housing since the tax structure would make housing less tax positive than fee simple individually taxed units. The applicant stated he could not make sufficient profit if market rate housing is excluded. The planning board fully supports and understands the desire for profit, but the definition of sufficient, quote unquote, was not fully explained by the applicant. The minority agreed with the applicant and supported this type of housing for similar reasons as the affordable housing regarding demography. 6. The majority of the board supports a tax-positive Butterfield site that would include commercial business. Opposition to senior housing by some members was based on insufficient tax gains by the village in comparison to commercial development. Some members thought senior housing that was not taxed as a typical residence, fee simple, is unfair to off-site homeowners and in effect causes the latter to subsidize the village services provided to Butterfield seniors. The subsidizers would include seniors still living in their fully taxed homes. Also, senior housing's lump sum payment in lieu of annual taxes for a designated period of time, example 10 years, is unfair for the duration and threatening beyond when the housing entity's ability to pay taxes may not be forthcoming. 7. Most developers understandably would like to load up a site with profit-making structures at the expense of open space. The applicant's original proposal was rather stingy on open space, and to his credit, he relented in granting more. The planning board differs on how much is sufficient, but the minority, who did not support any senior housing for reasons stated above, hoped the alternative uses, emphasizing commercial office retail, would leave more open space than is currently proposed. In general, all board members supported maintaining the elder trees on the site, although some were more willing to part with those located where Mr. Galero's proposed structures would be situated. An open lawn similar to what is now present is desirable, and we would like the developer to appreciate the advantages to the community in keeping a large swath of green. Page number 8. All buildings on the site should be designed to mesh with existing buildings in Cold Spring. This is particularly sensitive on the Pauline Avenue side of the property, which has some of the most beautiful Victorian houses in the village. The height of the buildings should be no higher than 2.5 stories as measured from all vantage points, so that topography and average height measurements do not result in structures that violate this limit. Mr. Galero's originally proposed structures were preposterously too large for Cold Spring, especially as the gateway to the village. 9. An overall traffic study of the Butterfield site and the surrounding area should be sponsored by the village. The owner of the site is not willing to increase the scope of the study beyond the property. This study should include the entire commercial area on the Chestnut Street Route 9D, so a general understanding of the implications of new development is understood. Section 3 is zoning recommendations. There's 2 of them. 1. The zoning code should be amended to permit all branches of government to be located in zones where the village government can be located. This will permit a proposed municipal building to house town and county offices as well as the U.S. Postal Service. 2. Butterfield site should remain Zone B4, but this district should be modified to support uses acceptable in other zones such as office, retail, and housing, if these uses are desired. As mentioned above, the planning board is split on supporting housing on the Butterfield site, so changing the zoning to support or ban its use is not a clear-cut recommendation of the board. And that's it. That's one. And now we have two, is Steve Gaba. So Steve Gaba, as I mentioned earlier, provided this as a format. Kind of hard to make sense of it without having it in front of you, but I'll do my best. So I'm going to read this out loud. So this would be a memo, I guess I'll call it, from the planning board to Mayor Gallagher and the trustees regarding the proposed Butterfield development. Dear Mayor Gallagher and trustees, the planning board has reviewed the above referenced project and offers the following report. It is noted that the engineering and other reports provided by the applicant have not yet been reviewed by the planning board's consultants. Accordingly, this report is largely conceptual in nature, although any readily apparent practical